In this first unit, I want to talk a little bit about what disability actually is, and correspondingly, what normalcy actually is. As I said earlier, I think that once we start to dig into these concepts, they become surprisingly non-obvious. There are two basic models for how to think about disability. The first one is the one that probably on the face of it seems most intuitive to you. It's probably what you would come up with on your own if you were asked to give a quick answer to what constitutes disability. And that's what we call the medical model of disability. This is the idea that disability is something wrong with an individual body. It's some kind of impairment or dysfunction in a particular body. And furthermore, it's the job of medicine to fix or mitigate or manage that impairment or dysfunction as best it can. This may seem obvious, but in fact, there have been a number of really interesting critiques of the medical model, and an alternative has been developed, which is known as the social model of disability. According to the social model of disability, disability really should not be thought of as a property of an individual body at all, but rather as a feature of the fit or lack of fit between a body and its social, material, and technological environment. So for example, think about something like myopia. Many of you are probably myopic or nearsighted and likely don't even think of that as a disability, because now it's so very easy to get a hold of relatively inexpensive, extremely effective, non-burdensome glasses and contacts that we just go ahead and take care of the problem and function just fine. If you lived in a hunter-gatherer society, however, myopia would be a very serious, perhaps even a fatal disability. So how impaired someone is can't be answered except in relationship to the environment that they're in, their social and material environment. Final example, and I think it's a particularly significant one that we'll come back to. Think about deafness, which is one of the classic disabilities. Think about just how much more of a disability deafness was even 10 or 15 years ago compared to now, when the vast majority of our communications with one another tend to be electronic by way of email or text or whatever it is. In this day and age, in an advanced technological society, a deaf person can communicate almost exactly the way anyone else can for purposes of work and other purposes. It really has dramatically less impact on what options are open to you and how you live your life. 20 years ago, pre-widespread internet use, it was a much, much more serious disability. But if disability turns out to be this kind of relational property, a property that concerns the fit between a body and its environment, then conversely, normalcy is also going to turn out to be that kind of a relational property. It's not going to be an inherent property of bodies. What counts as a normal body in one context might count as a disabled body in another context. So consider, there are some societies where the ability to carry heavy jugs of water on your shoulders for a 12-mile walk is a basic life skill. It's something you need to be able to do in order to take care of your family or whatever it may be. In the United States in the 21st century, that skill is not only a useless one, but it's one that almost nobody has. Very few Americans would be able to carry out that task. So whether your body counts as normal and functional, just like whether it counts as disabled, is also context dependent. Now notice here, when I say that I'm talking about a social model of disability, I'm not claiming that disability is a matter of social convention or social decision or that we've made it up or anything like that. Disability is very real and very concrete. To say that we're developing a social model of disability is instead to say, again, that we need to look at how the body is planted in its social and material world when we're thinking about how disabled it is or whether it's disabled or whether it's normal. Let's talk next about how we ought to address disability. In other words, what ought we be doing for people who have a disability? On the medical model of disability, the answer to this question is quite straightforward. What disabled people need is medical care, and then the question is only how much medical care are they owed socially and so forth. But we know that the way that we're going to address disability is through medical intervention or support. On the social model of disability, however, the story is more complicated. If disability is about a lack of fit between a body and its environment, then except for in a few cases where bodies are so dramatically impaired that no environment is really going to help them be more functional, we always have two choices available to us, or really three. We can always intervene on the body, or we can intervene on the environment, or we can do a combination of the two. This is always a choice available to us. If we detect a lack of fit between body and environment, it leaves open the question of whether we want to adjust the body or adjust the environment or adjust both. Down syndrome is a really interesting example here. Down syndrome comes from a chromosomal abnormality. It's a straightforwardly genetic physical condition. And so we might be inclined to think that because the cause of Down syndrome is so straightforwardly bodily and physical, that surely the medical model is the right model for thinking about it, and that the right thing to do for people with Down syndrome is simply to provide them with medical care. But what we've discovered over the last few decades is that the opposite is quite dramatically the case. That is to say, it turns out that when you change the social environment of people with Down syndrome, when you provide them with new educational opportunities, new opportunities for social networking and community, new kinds of support for their families so that they can be kept at home rather than growing up in an institution in families that do have enough support that they're flourishing rather than desperate, it turns out that all of those social changes dramatically change what people with Down syndrome can do. So now we have people with Down syndrome who have graduated from college, written books, gotten regular jobs, and become independent. We've even managed to dramatically increase the expected lifespan of people with Down syndrome by decades. It's a huge change. And these changes came overwhelmingly not through new medical treatments that directly affected the body, but through new social and environmental adjustments. So this is a great example of how it might be not at all obvious up front whether we want to adjust the body or the environment and how we want to adjust each one. Remember that example when we get to prenatal testing and disability in the next section, because it's going to be a particularly salient example.